Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, after looking at the prices of DDR4 and DDR5, I decided to take it back a few years and put together a PC using a DDR3 CPU, one of the best and one of the last in fact, the i7-4790K. So I've put it inside this system along with a 2060 Super RTX graphics card, and you're not really going to want anything higher end than this because as it is we will be running into a CPU limitation a lot of the time. I also found some cheap DDR3 32 gigs of the stuff. It's like AliExpress RAM or whatever, but it cost me £30 here, and I've bundled all this with a 750 watt PSU, so plenty of juice to keep this PC up and running. I decided to go for a Z97 board as well so that we could overclock the CPU to 4.6 GHz just to get the most out of this aging chip. I won't be mentioning pricing today because it's going to differ depending on where you are, but I thought it would be interesting to see how this old high-end CPU holds up in pairing with a modern RTX card. So let's get into it, and I think you may be pleasantly surprised. I certainly was in a handful of these titles. So we'll start with Baldur's Gate 3 here. I'm using the high preset with DLAA enabled. This is the best form of anti-aliasing in my opinion. TAA can make things look a little blurry. Now what you're going to notice with the i7 is that it will be a limitation in pretty much every game tested today, even though we have overclocked it to 4.6 GHz. Now I think we can possibly push this a little further, and this is something we're going to have to investigate, but I also mentioned the 2060 Super and how you probably don't want to go any higher than this in terms of graphical power. Now this is going to be true a lot of the time, but you may also see that in some situations we are actually maxed out in terms of what the graphics card could do, so we might actually be able to push this system a little further with a higher end GPU as well. But for the most part, something like this, an 8GB 2060 Super is going to be as good as you want to go with. It will also help you save a little bit of money because you don't really need to buy a high-end GPU to pair it with a CPU that's over 10 years old, no matter how good it once was. The AliExpress RAM I have in the system is clocked at 1866 MHz. Officially, I think the i7 supports 1600 MHz, but this is running just fine at its out-of-the-box clock speed here. So as you can see, a few dips and drops with Baldur's Gate 3, but in my opinion, this is certainly playable, even though we have left a bit of GPU performance on the table. Now when it comes to Battlefield 6, well, performance is certainly going to depend on the map and where you are in said map. This one is fairly open and there are a few areas that are sort of less populated in terms of things going on, and because of this we will see at least 60 FPS a lot of the time here. Again, it's quite a surprising result. Now the i7 is pretty much pegged at 99-100% utilization almost all of the time, as we can see, pretty much stuck to 4.6 GHz as well, which is what we like here. The overclock is working just fine. I have this on a Thermalright AK120 cooler. It cost me like £20, no, not even that, about £15 a couple of years ago on Amazon. I really like it. It's great for a lot of CPUs, especially the i7 here, which doesn't actually use all that much power, as we can see on screen here. In this one, the 2060 Super is still being held back a little bit. This is running at between 60 and 80% utilization a lot of the time, but I think overall there aren't too many dips and drops here. It's a pretty respectable effort from this system, especially the i7, which dates back to 2014, and in PC terms, well, that's pretty much ancient. Might as well be from the Stone Age. Next up we have Counter-Strike 2 at the high preset with 4x MSAA. Not really much to complain about here. We were seeing at least 60 FPS a lot of the time. Now a consistent plus 120 FPS isn't really achievable, especially with this CPU in the system, but for the most part the game remained smooth, and as you can see, retaining at least 60 FPS isn't going to be an issue for this setup in pairing with the 2060 2060 Super. This also gives us a little bit more headroom to play around with those higher resolutions in those less intensive games as well, so bear that in mind. But this is very much a 1080p build in 2026, early 2026 I think. For Cyberpunk 2077 we have the high preset, which will default to the medium crowds. That said, we do have the high textures enabled, and that's something that isn't too hard to achieve thanks to the 8 gigs of VRAM with the 2060 Super. I think that is an added benefit of going with the Super version of the card. We get 8 gigs of VRAM as opposed to 6. Now some people say that 8 gigs isn't enough, especially now going into 2026, but I think if you're playing at 1080p in a lot of games that have already been out for a few years, then it's absolutely fine, as you can see here. In the case of this one, well, our CPU is definitely the primary concern, but as you can see here, the RTX 2060 Super isn't too far off maximum utilization in some instances. You may have seen just then it was hovering around 95 to 99%. Yeah, the i7, I mean, that's going to be at least 90% most of the time, as expected, especially as we make our way into those more crowded areas. That's why this benefits from the crowd density setting being set to medium or even low, but it's not going to help you all that much, especially as we make our way further into Night City like I'm doing here. You are going to notice a few dips and drops, but we're not going to drop below 30 FPS pretty much ever, which is good. So you might want to think about implementing a 40 FPS cap, much like you might be inclined to do on the Steam Deck, for example. That's something I used to do all of the time. Limit it to 40 FPS and then have a really nice and smooth experience. Fortnite, despite having one of the better averages in today's tests, probably suffered the most on the i7 in terms of inconsistencies. It did feel quite stuttery to play. Now sometimes with older or weaker CPUs this problem will go away, we'll play for a few minutes and then the CPU utilization will drop from 100% to like 60, but here, yeah, I mean the CPU was just like pegged at 100% pretty much all of the time and nothing really changed. I don't even think it dropped to 99. It was just like, nah, you need a better CPU for this one, mate. I have seen a few 6-core 12-thread chips struggle in this title as well. I wouldn't say this is struggling though, to be honest. It is playable as you can see, but apparently not smooth enough for me to stay alive for longer than 5 minutes. For GTA 5 Enhanced, we can make use of the beautiful, very high RT preset along with DLAA. Now, this is going to eat into our frame rate a little bit, but I think it just makes things look a bit sharper, well, a lot sharper. TAA can make things just look like a blurry mess, to be honest, so DLAA, if you have supported hardware, is the way to go. And as you can see here, the GPU is hitting 95 to 100% utilization, well, 90 to 100% a lot of the time. You might even be able to squeeze a few more frames out of this game with the 4790K and a more powerful GPU, but I think this is still the sort of upper limit of where you'd want to be with a CPU in pairing with a card like this. That said, if you were putting together an RTX PC, you still had an older CPU like this one, you were waiting for prices to go down of DDR4, DDR5 RAM, and then you could still make do with an i7, I think, in a lot of titles. It's really not horrible to use at all, and considering the age, I'm quite pleased with how it's performing, or quite surprised in some cases too. The overclock probably comes in handy though. One of my all-time favourites is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and this is another one whereby we saw higher GPU utilisation, pointing to a far more balanced experience in terms of this entire system. Sure, the CPU was still hitting at least 80-90% here, but for the most part things remained pretty consistent. We were seeing a plus 60 FPS average. I think the exact figures will be up on screen, and from what I can tell, the percentile lows aren't going to be too bad either. It felt fairly smooth. Moving into certain areas did cause a few little dips and drops, but as I mentioned, this is to be expected from a processor of this age. It was a fantastic choice back in 2014, of course, especially if you had an overclockable or overclock capable motherboard to really squeeze more performance out of it. And even so, I think if you made that investment back then, what, $350 I think it was, maybe I'm wrong, I think you'd have been pretty happy over the last decade, especially if you're still using it today. We'll finalise with Red Dead Redemption 2. Here we were using the ultra textures with everything else set to medium/on, so everything that had an off-on toggle was set to on apart from MSAA. The geometry level of detail and grass level of detail sliders were also set to max, and TAA was set to medium. Here we saw at least 60 FPS even in and around Valentine. In fact, the performance dips a little bit more when we wander off into the woodland in the distance there, the grass and all the effects that go along with it. But we almost always retain 60, which was nice to see here. And this looks really good with the medium settings. Ultra textures, I think, are a must. And on the 2060 Super, we can certainly choose that option. If we look at the GPU utilization again, we'll see that we are pretty much maxed out in terms of GPU power. But busier areas, towns, cities will cause a few more dips and drops. But there we are, the i7 4790K in very early 2026. We'll have to look at this again at the end of the year using like strictly new games from 25 and 26 just to make sure we are pushing this thing to its limits, and it'll be interesting to see how it holds up then as well in a year's time. As for now, if you want to buy one of these, you want the best of the best when it comes to consumer DDR3 chips, I don't think it's horrible at all. Sure, you're going to notice problems in some games, dips and drops here and there, especially because of the 4 cores and 8 threads running on that plus 10-year-old architecture, but can't complain too much. And with that, thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.